All right, gentlemen, we are live. I hope you are all doing well this evening. I am, as I said there on X, I'm going to be flying solo tonight, and I hope you guys are having a good time. So, tonight, I'm going to let a few more people come in and jump on here, get some eyes on. But anyway, I am going to be streaming about dog books. In particular, I think they're evening wit. I think there is a particular type of dog book that came about in the 20th century here in the US, and I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I could be totally wrong on that. And so if you're able to correct me, please do jump into the chat, jump in and, tell me what's going on there. Leave a comment if you're seeing this after everything is live. But I'm going to run with a theory I've got, and we'll see if it's right or wrong. I've done a little bit of research, but it's one of those things that unless you're talking to the right person, you don't know what you don't know type thing. So, what I want to jump into tonight and talk about is the American dog book. What I mean by dog book, I don't mean, let me see what I can get. I don't mean a plot device. I don't mean a main character. This one is really interesting. London himself is almost a singularity. We'll get to that and sort of explain where I'm going in there with that. Well, hello there, Janelle. I hope you're having a good evening. So this one's going to come up there. I've got a stack over here, but in particular, when I'm talking dog book, there's almost a trifecta, a hat trick that I think summarizes this whole idea of where I'm headed with the dog book. And that's going to be Old Yeller and Big Red. And then the last one would be Where the Red Fern Grows. And I can't find my copy of it. I looked for it, I can't find it. But what's going on in those books is that you have a coming of age tale with a young man, and the dog isn't simply a milieu or a plot device. It is a character, but the main character, sort of like Toy Story, where the main character in Toy Story was always Andy. Well, I guess you get into the fourth and fifth one, whatever. But the main character there is Andy, and it's him growing. And so, in these dog books that I'm talking about, it's these boys, whether it's Travis, whether it's the other two, that they're growing up and they are figuring out how to interact with the world, and them figuring that out is being influenced by the opportunities that these dogs are giving them, and then also just by the participation that these dogs have within their life. So to start out on why I think this is a uniquely American thing, if you look at any of the three big ones that I noticed, and there's others that you can lump in there, but I would say they're not as strong a contender because part of it is plot, part of it is also timing. What's going on here is that these books are written by authors that were, what is it, Silent Generation? I'm pretty sure that was Silent Generation. Um, they are they are participating in the last vestiges of what had been the American identity, especially post Civil War. We had westward expansion. We had the Indian Wars. We had frontierism. We had Manifest Destiny. And that's part of the reason that I think these books are particular and curious within the U.S. Excuse me. Unlike Europe, unlike Germany and England, which are your two big dog countries, what we're seeing in the states is it's more rough. It's less clear cut, and that's wonderfully apparent in Old Yeller. In Old Yeller, so this is, I forget which printing this is, but this is the Disney dog who, as I remember, was a yellow lab and a mastiff. And what happened in there, I'm sorry. So Copper Star has been on a roll for the past few days, and he just continues to make me chuckle. So, uh, where was I? Oh, Disney had this yellow dog, and as I remember, it was a lab and a mastiff mix. What happens is if you dig into the book, it's actually a daggum a cur dog. The cur dogs, if you go back into my library a bit, way back towards the beginning of this channel, I ended up doing a stream on. It was a repeat of a repeat. It was a thread I had written on X regarding cur dogs. And what happens is these aren't curs in a definitional sense, in that we don't know what they are. They're not mutts, but these were standardized dogs that came about in the U.S. But where they had come from wasn't entirely plain. And so Johnson's dog was over here, and Smith's dog was over here, and they got together to the point that in Kentucky they had original mountain curs and they had Kemmer curs, and down in Florida they had Florida curs and they had Stevens, and if you went out to Texas you got blue lacies and you got blackmouths, and so they were cur dogs because they didn't know the entire background of them, but they weren't curs as in mutts. They had a purpose and they had a standardized expectation of what they could accomplish with them. And so, out of those three, out of um, Old Yeller and Where the Red Fern Grows, and then Big Red, there's this interesting poll in that you can put Old Yeller on one end and you can put Big Red on the other end. And Where the Red Fern Grows sits clearly in the middle of the two. And this is how it all washed out. It's almost in every sense that this is what went on. So, Old Yeller is Texas. Big Red is way up here in Pennsylvania. It's technically unclear, but it's Pennsylvania, Allegheny, Appalachia, but very much the second wave, the post Civil War America. Interestingly enough, out of the three books, this is the only one where the author, you're not going to find. Let's see if I can get this in focus. Come on now. You can't really get in focus, but Kilgard right there. Kjelgaard. Um, you're not going to find his name within the Civil War registry. And so, like I said, over here with Gibson and Old Yeller, and then you've got Where the Red Fern Grows, and then you've got Big Red. You've got this spread of a post Civil War America. And Gibson is frontier, and it's daunting and it's overwhelming, and it's how is a dog plugging into what's being accomplished. And frankly, spoiler alert for anybody who's not aware of the story, but it's a fellow that goes in and oh, glory, what now? Y'all are having fun this evening. Okay. So, um, Lord, so Old Yeller, you got over here on down in Texas, and it's frontier. How does the dog plug in? Oh yeah, spoiler alert. There's going to be spoilers throughout, but the kid Travis, he wants a horse. It makes sense to him how a horse plugs into his life, whether it's cattle or whether it's transportation. The dog doesn't make a whole lot of sense until Old Yeller gets there and proves his worth. In Where the Red Fern Grows, you're sitting in the Ozarks, and the Ozarks are this funny place. Well, Missouri in itself is this funny place because this is uh, roughly the, if I remember correctly, it's the 20s, the 1920s, during the Depression. And so you already have St. Louis, you have Gateway to the West, you have a big group of people that um, westward expansion has already primarily occurred, but there is still a little the last vestiges, that last allure of word. So you have that, and then if you go to that last point on this path, you've got Kilgard. He is, as best I can tell, I couldn't find any information. I'm assuming his folks were Ellis Islanders or 48ers or something in there. And he's in there and he's writing about, again, what we can just call Pennsylvania. It's not entirely clear in the book, but he is writing about land that is owned by a businessman but is managed by uh, excuse me, not lower class but income. They're working class folks. So I guess it is, you know what I mean. And so we're moving from this pioneering, this great big spread, more to working class still owning property, all the way to working class that are just managing what someone else owns. But in all these cases, this is that last gasp. And these are books written to young boys and to young fellas, I think, with an expression of not masculinity, and it's not masculinity in that the boy must grow to be a warrior, but it's masculinity in how is a young man supposed to act in this environment that he's finding himself. And so, in that, the big one there with Daggum Old Yeller is the father's gone for 9/10 of the book. That's sort of how the book opens, is that he's going on this great big cattle drive. And so Travis is trying to figure out, where is my spot? How do I slip into this, and how do I manage this? And we jump into Where the Red Fern Grows. And the father's not gone. The father's clearly there, but the father is working. He's managing his fields and he's managing his household. And so the son says, well, daggum, how do I just carve out this piece of life for me? How do I operate in this? Because we're poor and I might not have a whole lot coming to me. And then you get all the way into Big Red. And like I said, this one this one is sort of the polar opposite in some ways from Old Yeller, because Old Yeller, it's the cur dog. It's fighting and dealing with America. And Big Red it's a show dog. It's an Irish setter. It is a dog that's coming from money. It is him interacting with the moneyed class, but not being of money himself. And so this this whole picture is how young men are going to operate within America, and how they're going to take on the mantle of those that were before them. And so all the men prior to them had been able to participate in this experience. One of the things that, and again, I talk about this on that stream I did on Cur Dogs, is that these are guys who are pushing into a new country. The dog played more of a role in the U.S. than it's not than any other place in the world. But what it is that we have a recording of the dog interacting with people in the US more so than we do throughout Europe and other areas, in a way. What I mean by in a way is that in the US, we were still we it was those first few pages of The Revenant. It was Hugh Glass with Terra Incognita. He is looking to the west. He is building. He's chasing the sun, chasing that star. Whereas if you look over in Europe, it's that meme where daggum, you have the European forest and it all looks nice and calm, and that's where the gnomes are, and that's where the different joyous folk tales are. Whereas here in the States, you show a picture of the forest, and it's wolves and it's coyotes and it's potentially even bears, and that pops up in various dog books, because that is the great unknown here in the U.S. It's what's happening. Give me just a moment, please. Sorry, there was a bit of unexpected craziness going on. Anyways, Wits in here. He says, I need to go back and watch Old Yeller. It's been over 35 years since it shattered my fragile little psyche. Perhaps I could endure it now. Okay, so that actually gets in to a big thing. Let's see. Jordan, we see you. I'm glad you're here for the dogs. Um, we're going to come back to that idea, but I will also say that the interesting thing about Old Yeller is out of the three of them, they all had movies made after them. If you're gonna watch any on Where the Red Fern Grows, watch the one from the '70s. I think it was the '70s. Um, and then Old Yeller, as far as I'm aware, only has that original one with what's his name from the fellow that plays Travis, and he's the one in Monkey's Uncle and all that. I can't remember. Anyways, and then there is one on Big Red. Don't even bother watching the movie on Big Red if you can even find it. Disney did it. But what happens with that one is Disney completely changed the plot, and it's not it's not worth dealing with as a portion or as an adaptation of Big Red. If you want to do Big Red, you have to read the book. If you want to do Where the Red Fern Grows, the night again, I think it's the '70s. That movie's all right. It's a fun movie. I'm a guy that's almost always the book's going to be better than the movie, but and then the Disney Old Yeller is really good, but going back to the idea that these are explorations of manhood, of coming of age, of participating in America as well as participating in America as an expansion, but as well as participating in civilization as a man. I think you're definitely worthwhile reading all three of these. Again, this is the hat trick. There are some others that Fishbone Song is out there. It's not heavy on the dog, but he's in there. I have not read Sounder. I don't know where that's at. Shiloh nearly made the cut. The the issue being what I'm focusing on here is that transition of America the wild to America the civilized. And I think that's part of why we have these books available to us. And these aren't the only ones. If you go back and you look in the '40s, '50s, and even they were dying out towards the end of the '50s, but you can even find some there in the '60s. And then Shiloh, I think, was written in the '90s. I think it was published in 1991 or whatever. But what's going on is that you are having the last men who culturally were participating in dogs, who it was something that every boy understood, and that takes us back to that whole idea with Old Yeller. And I suspect, right, like who's keeping track of this is saying yes, this is what happened. But I suspect there were many a boy, if not most boys, young men growing up, that at some point had to either put their dog down or had to watch their dog die. The a whole number of things, whether it was a dog getting kicked from a cow, whether it was reaching old age, whether it was rabies. There was prior to vets being standard, prior to people having access to vets, prior to the settling of the United States, these frontiersmen and these homesteaders, they're operating in a way where they are the vet, where they have a limited amount of resources, and they run the gamut between this really strict and hard march or die attitude over to how much can I get away with, how much freedom do I have to allow Old Yeller to heal from some issue, to allow uh, this show dog to try and participate with these other rowdier dogs. Another good one that doesn't fit within the type of book that we're talking about is The Fox and the Hound. Again, it's completely different than the Disney movie, and you're in luck because it was just reprinted here in the past month. And so you can get in there and you can read. I believe that one's also set in Pennsylvania, but you'll be able to read just about the hunt and what was going through these guys' mind, because post westward expansion, all they had left was the hunt. And you'll still see this to some degree in guys that go and spend $2,000 just to go and sit out in another state and pay for hunting tags. Anyways, I'm not going to go down that road right now. Hunt, do it. It's well worth your time. There's just some not nice things I could say about some cohorts within the hunting group. Anyways, let's not go down that road. We get back to westward expansion, and we're saying that, oh, this is what went on at this time. This is slow, or it's not immediately after Laura Ingalls Wilder and her just pulling the lid off and saying, here, this is what we did, and moving from Minnesota out to, I can't remember if they went to Nebraska or wherever, but that whole idea of homesteading and frontierism. And it was only, when was Geronimo? Regardless, you see what I'm saying. If these men, when they were writing, hadn't participated in that, they caught the wafts of it from grandma, from grandpa, from their parents. And that dives into that whole idea of me saying that this is unique to America, because again, Europe had already been settled. And so what we see dogs in European books, but I have yet to find that coming of age, the dog is with me in these grand adventure type narratives. And what's also unique is it's not grand adventure as in these dogs are acting as a dragon, or these dogs are acting in something completely fantastical and unmoored. No, these dogs are operating in something that these young men got to participate in. This again, this is why I keep hammering this, and why I think it's worth discussing and thinking about, and just straining out like a gnat, because this is America. This is an American expression. These dogs were American expressions. This idea of the young man interacting with the dog and going and conquering is an American idea. Now, this gets into the other part of my theory. I don't think it's exclusively American through history. What I think, and again, throw comments in the chat, throw comments down if you're not watching this live, and tell me I'm wrong. But what I kind of think and wonder is that uh, we went through 500 years, a millennia of not going into unknown territory, and depending on dogs like we did with westward expansion. Because I'm not going to stand here and argue the rights and the wrongs of what was going on with rugged individualism, and what that meant, and atomized. And okay, the American experience is that we were rugged individualists, that we were atomized to some degree, and that we, not the government, had to take it upon ourselves to go out and do something. And what we found in trying to do something and accomplish something is that these dogs were helping us accomplish it. And so this is in contrast to the Spanish saying, hey, we're going to go and we're going to find the new world, and we're going to operate in this manner, and we're going to bring livestock, and we're going to bring dogs, and we're going to there were absolutely dogs with the conquistadors. There were dogs in Spanish expansion. But by the time we get to this Civil War era, this post Civil War, this manifest destiny, the Spanish are gone. Don't be absurd. Obviously there's Texicans, and there's all that. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is that there is not a government behind you pushing into this area. And there wasn't even really with the U.S. The 7th Cavalry is up here dealing with some stuff, and there's some stuff going down, in the nation of Texas. But these were Anglos and Scots Irish and Germans and a few Nords and people who said, I want to know what's out there and I want to conquer it and I want to be able to have a farm and take my horses out there. And how they did that was working together as well as employing dogs. And that just so happened to happen in a time in history where they could keep track of that, where Lewis and Clark can write down what was going on with their dogs and the name of the dogs that they brought with them, where Robert E. Lee has Traveler and he could say, this is my horse, and we have records of this. And not just him, but you can go down to men and have accounts of their dogs and of the mixed lineage or the unknown lineage or whatever. Now, we see that a little bit with London, and he's kind of the elephant in the room in all this because he doesn't, when you get to London, almost always the dog is the main character. He's writing epics in the with the canvas of a dog. And so in White Fang and Call of the Wild, these are stone cold children's first epics. They make you want to beat your chest. The stuff that Buck is doing is insane. But again, the focus there is the dog. It's not the young man. Probably the closest output from London that leans toward what I'm talking about is To Build a Fire. And it's not a one for one. Obviously, at that point, we have a grown man, but it's a grown man who goes into a wilderness that he is incapable of conquering himself. And if anything, London repeatedly points out that he is not participating with the dog. He's not listening to the dog. He is not gaining wisdom from the dog, which is the opposite of what we see in Big Red, Old Yeller, and Where the Red Fern Grows. So again, I think the big issue is what America was doing and the fact that we could write down our thoughts and give these sort of dog stories. I think these dog stories absolutely occurred with Roman expansion, with different cultures that were depending on their dogs. But this is prior to papers being easily accessible, to writing materials being easily accessible, or at the very least to these things being not serviceable, but to be able to hold on to I don't know, museums and light fastness and all, preservable. This is prior to these accounts being preservable, particularly for the lower class. And there is this weird inversion if we go back to the government being involved in then the financial classes of these people. These are poorer groups. These are poorer groups that are depending on the dog. They didn't have necessarily the repeating rifles or the hand of the government, the backing of different army troops, whatever. These were the Americans that went out and participated with their dogs in this journey. And so, again, I don't think it's unique in actuality, but I do think it's unique in that it was preserved for us, if not by the people who did it, like Lewis and Clark, then by the people who knew what it was, like Gibson, like Mannix and the Daggum Fox and the Hound, like Kilgard, like whoever was wrote Where the Red Fern Grows, shoot Rawls. And so that I think is a worthy idea. I'm straining out a gnat, but I think it is a worthwhile gnat. So to go into that, we already talked about London and why his dog stories are a completely different expression of what it is I'm trying to talk about. London writes the character of the dog, and that's the main character. This one, Lassie Come Home, is an interesting one because it's actually one of the first ones that we have published. I believe it was published here in the States, but Knight's an interesting fella. He's English. He came over to the U.S. He started serving in the U.S. Army, and he actually dies in an airplane crash that was an official flight with the U.S. Army, if I remember correctly. And so when I don't count Lassie in those books I was talking about. One, because there is not this how do Americans deal with what's going on? Because Lassie is actually set in northern England, Scotland, the border area where border collies and I believe rough collies came out of Shelties might have come out of there, but those particular kind of herding dogs, that's where it's set. But again, this is written by a Brit who came over here, and so I'm talking about something very specific, and I think it's an interesting idea. I could be way off on it. It could just be that I'm ignorant to these ideas of expansion and manhood within English literature. And when I say English, I mean the UK. I don't mean American. There are the English use dogs, other than Tolkien, because how could I have a stream and not bring him up? Uh, and I haven't read Roverandom. I need to read that. But in Lord of the Rings, you have two instances that I'm aware of dogs, and the first one is Farmer Maggot, and so there is still an English writing, and not just in that one. I mean, you have Kipling. Right, Kipling's really interesting with dogs. He writes them really well, except when I'm saying he writes dogs really well, I not quite. I'm talking about wolves. And Kipling's just a good writer, but he does it in a way they have almost that intersection between the wild and not the mundane but the domesticated. So there's this curious interplay that Kipling does in his books. He has another one. Shoot, I can't remember the name of it, but it is one that's particular to dogs that I have not yet read, and I need to get to that one. But the whole Farmer Maggot idea is my familiarity with um, English and European dogs to a great degree, and it comes out in the James Herriot books as well, where these dogs are useful tools. Old Yeller, he was going to catch hogs and move pigs and all that. Um, oh dear, Wit, I don't. You missed a fair bit, but maybe folks would just say I was droning on about the same thing. I'm not. I'm not sure. Right now, we're jumping into that idea of the difference between American and English as in UK books and how they interact with them. Um, but you know, Harriet and Tolkien, they've got these dogs and they are operating within their expectation, but it is very much a, I don't want to say gilded cage. It is a conquered field, and so they can have Farmer Maggot's hounds that they write about. They can have Tricky Woo and pet dogs, and there is this clear platform that these particular breeds are supposed to operate within. Oh, and then the second reference within Lord of the Rings in regards to dogs and hounds is Rohan. There's a quick mention in there about it might even be from Futzenuts, the worm tongue, talking about how the dogs eat there and chew on the bones amidst the king. It might be back and forth with him. Regardless, it's Rohan and his Farmer Maggot. I don't think there's any other hounds in Tolkien. Well, excuse me, in Lord of the Rings, but maybe there is. Um, but there's just a plainness is too harsh. But again, there are conquered fields when it gets to Europe, and that is how the dog interacts with the society, with the civilization. The exception to that I'm aware of is Adams. Now I have not yet read Plague Dogs in its entirety. I'll get there at some point. Uh, but in reading portions of that and looking at how uh, the rabbits fight against the dog in Watership Down, and seeing how Adams interacts with the bear in Shardik, there's this there is this manifestation of the baseness of a particular creature that Adams has, but he doesn't let that get in the way of the fantastical, of the character driven story that he is trying to produce. And so I love Adams, but sort of like Kipling, I wouldn't say that they're writing dogs as such. I think Kipling is closer. I think Kipling is closer, but I wouldn't say, in my experience with Adams, that he's writing dogs as such, but they are the manifestation again of the character that he's trying to achieve. Wit, I absolutely believe you. I think I have nothing bad to say about Adams. The worst I can say is that Shardik is a bit of a mess. Is too strong. There are there are cadences in Shardik that are almost as if he was trying to pull a tooth out. He knew what he was going for, and he just couldn't quite get the intensity that he was looking for. Couldn't quite get get the angle, and so Shardik is an interesting book. It has nothing to do with dogs. If anything, it deals with a bear, but I would say it's worth reading for everyone. But like the Silmarillion, it's kind of a slog, and it's you just trying to reach in and pull out what he is headed towards, but it doesn't quite hit you like Watership Down. Watership Down is, uh, the American phrase is it's lightning in a bottle. It's unbelievable, and I would say now I'm biased here because of vocationally or however you want to put it, the Lord has arranged my life. Um, I would say out of the three, Old Yeller is probably my biggest jam. It's the one that I have gone back and read the most out of the three of them. They're all three worth reading and rereading, but Old Yeller is probably the one that cuts the deepest and hits the hardest out of the three of them. And man, when you can hear the the bawling of the hounds in Where the Red Fern Grows, when you can hear that chop bark in Big Red, and then when you can hear both of those in action in Old Yeller, and he is baying up hogs, and they're having to cut ears, and they're having to worry about corn and storage and what happens when dad is gone. That is, for various reasons, the book that I can um, interact the most organically. That's the one that I can interact the most organically with. But like I've said, all three of them are fantastic books. Jump into them. Uh, Having said that, I think that's more or less my TED talk this week. But Yeah. Anyway, we'll go on from there. Sorry, I'm also looking on X right now to try and make sure I'm not missing any sort of comments or questions on there. We can. Thank you, Copper Star. I agree. I agree. If you're not watching the stream, and you know about it, you're an obvious dog hater. So, anyways, that's it on the dog books. I think I think they are, again, uniquely American, not because they are literally uniquely American, but because they occurred in a particular time that allowed authors to get these ideas out and push them before a whole cadre of young men that knew what this meant, that could still smell the tack oil and the the deer the deer defecation and the creek and the mud of westward expansion, of what their dogs went through in trying to track down coons and trying to push a bear off a farmer's piece of property or whatever. And that, unfortunately, is something that so few boys get to participate in nowadays. And so it's easy. The easy segue from here would be for us to say, how do boys go on these adventures and participate in something that is beyond them? And that's another stream for another day. But man, have your boys, as much as you can encourage them, have them read London, have them read Adams, have them read Daggum James Harriet, and well, maybe wait till they're teenagers or at least 12 years old or something to get into that. But have them read Kipling, at least in their media. Give them an adventure, not this. The MCU is fun, okay, whatever, and there are at its base worthwhile things, the idea of the hero and of sacrifice, but man, give them something that they can plug into. If they're Americans, they have this history, and I have to say this because I'm daggum a Midwest mutt, a mixed breed of the Midwest. So I've got English Anglo over here, and I've got German over here, but that's fine. Take the Custer route and send them out there into the wild prairie to say that we came from a group of people that went out and conquered and explored and tried to set up civilization. And a big, big, big part of that were dogs. Not pets, dogs. All right. So that's what I've got on the books. I hope you all found that interesting, inspiring, and if you think I'm nuts, just put it down there in the comments. Other than that, I've got a little bit of time to do the whole AMA thing. I know there's a bit of a delay on here, so go ahead and throw anything in there if you'd like. I'm going to take just a minute and step away for a second, and then I shall return. All right, fellas, I have returned. I'm not seeing anything in chat. I'm not seeing anything on X. So, on that note, I will do a bit of shilling and we will get out here. Yeah, out of here. Uh-oh. Until I get back, I spoke too early. Let's see what we got here, Wit. All right, chat, what are we going to grill about? He appears to be a glutton for punishment. Yes, I that would be fine. If they start coming in, I'm pretty much an open book right now. We could talk about Southern Baptist Convention. We could talk about military. We could talk about why I'm no longer in the Southern Baptist Convention. We could talk about, I don't know, dogs, horses, guns, explosives, uh, different parts of literature. I don't know. The biggest problem is honestly the delay on this thing. So it's all right. I feel like I'm always about 5 minutes ahead. That's not true, but that's what it feels like. Gee, I don't know. What about the SVC? Um, so the biggest thing is that, like anybody else, it's a bit of a tired story at this point on the alt right, dissident right, thinking right, whatever you want to call it right now. I I did not grow up SBC. I had no particular interest in the Southern Baptist Convention, and based on my own experience with Baptists, I was not a Baptist. So I grew up in something called the Nazarene Church. It is for lack of better phrasing, it's general evangelical. It comes out of Methodism, but then there's also a bit of evangelicalism, of Pentecostalism thrown in there. So I grew up in that. By and large, I would go to a Baptist youth group sometimes. Whatever there were, my dad was raised Lutheran, and then it was really my mom who was big on Nazarene to begin with, but then dad, especially as he started taking his faith more and more seriously, he certainly participated in that. We did a little bit of time in a Free Will Baptist church in Colorado because that's what was available. Uh, anyways, I was not SBC. I wound up. I so I was in the military. I got hurt in a pretty big way. Let's see, with saying I know so very little about it. What's your relationship, or was your relationship? Yeah. So I was in the military. I got hurt in a pretty big way, and the Nazarene Church was not cutting it for me. And there were some different frustrations there. Not all of them were legitimate. It was also just me being young and jerky in some ways. So in the midst of this, I start reading Calvin, and I start learning about predestination and providence, and I start interacting with that. I did not take the full plunge into being a Presbyterian at that point when I first started, because the the Nazarenes, the whole general evangelical idea, it was believers' baptism, and so I I jumped into different Reformed churches, of which ultimately, oh, this is an interesting comment. I have great respect for Wesley and little respect for Methodism. Well, it's interesting, and I think you could probably, if you have enough familiarity with any given sect within Christianity, and I expect with any given religion in general throughout the world, you would have enough complaints about it to say that it's not particularly worthwhile. I will say that even though I'm not a reformed guy, and even though he and I would disagree on many things, or I should say they and I would disagree on many things, I very much appreciate the works of Charles Spurgeon, of J.I. Packer, R.C. Sproul, Dagum, Matthew Henry. Just it's this great salve for the soul. It's water to a thirsty man. Even though I don't ultimately believe in what they're saying, or some of their distinctives. I mean, absolutely, it all goes back to Christ. That's easy enough. But some of the distinctives, I'm not there. But I also think that some of these men were unbelievable. So I I'm digging on the Reform stuff. It was during the Young Restless Reformed, and I also believe that I was supposed to be doing stuff. Yeah, I'll be honest with I don't have. Uh, I mean, outside of the big controversies within the United Methodist Church, there's, and I can't even quite remember what the Free Methodists are. Um, I don't have too much familiarity with them, and I believe you might be able to correct me on this, but I believe Methodism, uh, it got it got almost puritanical in the way it approached works, um, but almost with less grace. And that when Wesley himself gets talking about holiness, it was sort of this idea that I can become holier than Paul, or even potentially as holy as Christ. It's just that I'm not yet there. Um, and these, so one of the things that, and we're getting off the SBC, but one of the things that the church did in the 20th century. Um, let's see. I'm with you respecting those names. You need totally agree with them to, yeah, absolutely. One of the things so that the church did in the 20th century is they saw what was coming down the pike. We had at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century some of the greatest Protestant theologians that have ever existed. And they saw and were aware. You had the Lions of Princeton and B.B. Warfield and all of that, and they saw what was coming down the pike, and they understood what was going to happen between Darwin and evolution and the post Civil War, social issues that were going on in the U.S. They saw what was coming with that, and they started buckling down and saying, "What are the fundamentals?" Which is a good idea in itself. But what happened is that um, it, my argument would be that there were guys that went too far in their actual prescription, and then there were guys that got off base of what the fundamentals were. And rather than focusing on the fundamentals of Christ and grace and God achieving his purposes here in this world, it became the fundamental of holiness living, to the point that if you are not living a certain way, you are not participating in God's holiness. And then it went beyond that to say that if you were doing this, you were beyond God's holiness. And rarely was it stated in that way, but that's what uh, different portions of Methodism and Low Church and Baptist ideas ultimately morphed into. Well, and frankly, there was a lot of that within Pentecostalism as well. And so, in the midst of this, and part of it too is this overreaction to Ellis Islanders and to continental Europeans coming over and bringing these strange forms and these abominable forms. And so the Scots Irish with their Presbyterianism, which Reformed is interesting because it can evidence itself as this nasty, brutal religion. But if you actually get into the three forms of unity and the Westminster Confessions, there is this great abundance of grace in there. That's just not something that, especially in the 20th century, people were seeing. Um, Unless potentially you get into the split with PCUSA and the PCA, and I'm not as well versed as I would like to be in that to really go on about it. So anyway, fundamentalism was good, but I'm of the belief that the further along into the 20th century we went, the more unmoored it got from the actual gospel. Uh, yeah, that's kind of harsh, but that's where I would go with that. So then, no, but I think so. J.C. Ryle's book Holiness. I don't think I've actually read that one, but I'm pretty sure I have it on the bookshelf. It's another one I need to. It's another one I need to dig into. Um, okay, so going back to SBC, I get hurt. I'm frustrated with, not particularly frustrated with God. Yeah, but then I'm frustrated with my understanding of God. So I don't, I don't even know. Okay, Copper Star, I'm gonna take you at your word on that one. So, oh, but what I will say is the Semitic approach to canines is radically different from Europeans, especially Germanic. The It's been my experience that the Germanic approach to dogs is is unique within the world. I think that's true. It's been my experience, um, and I think that is a curiosity because I don't know where exactly that comes from, but I like it. I appreciate it. There. So I'm I'm not walking it back, but I will say there is the Japanese likewise, the Chinese to some degree, but my understanding with the Chinese, they don't have as much breadth of dogs and purposes with dogs as the Japanese. But certainly the Japanese are dog masters in their own right, and I'm not Semitic, not North African, but I'm not entirely sure what the sub-Saharan relationship with dogs is. So taking all that back to the SBC operates in this weird. So it was doing this weird thing in the turn of the millennium with Hal Moeller and um, these issues of who are we? Because what happens with Baptists is that there's two primary strains. Yes, unfortunately, the Chinese have been known to eat dogs, and it's soul crushing. They are, I've gotten a lot better these days of not watching particular videos, and those videos that pop up of the Chinese with dogs are among the easiest to forego and not deal with. Um, yeah. Anyways, that's another thing for another stream. Um, okay, so SBC is having this interesting conflict. Is a little strong. Ultimately, did come into some sort of conflict, and that one of the sayings is that Baptists move 20 years slower than any other denomination. And the Baptists would be upset right now because they're not a denomination. Okay, whatever. Baptists as a group, they move 20 years slower than other groups within Christianity. And so what you saw in the late 20th century with the Baptists is that Copper Star, you're on a roll tonight. Okay. So when it comes to theology, I just default to Stone Choir. So I will say I was much more taken with Stone Choir prior to the Mailer White debate. I thought Mailer just absolutely bombed in there, and it has been very difficult for me to take him seriously since his debate with White. Uh, yeah, it's as simple as that. SBC is trying to pull back in more than Presbyterians and splitting more than who else split around that time. Presbyterian split. There were a bunch of churches that formed Calvary Chapel and all that, but I'm trying to think who split the. Well, I feel like what was the split between Free Methodists and United Methodists. Regardless, the yes, they do. They do. They're curious. I believe both of the guys in Stonechoir. I believe they're both Lutherans, but correct me if I'm wrong. So the Presbyterian split. I believe the Methodists may have split earlier on in the 20th century. I might be wrong on that. What's going on with the SBC at this point is they're trying to transcend to some degree their Baptist identity, because what most folks don't recognize, and even Baptists, what they don't recognize is that when you say that you're a Baptist, it doesn't mean that you're a Baptist. What I mean by that is that there's two major streams of Baptist theology and Baptist thought. There is the Anabaptist, the rebaptism. It had much more of a continental significance, that said that no, we were never baptized to begin with, and we need to jump into this hardcore radical Reformation. The Catholics were wrong on everything. The Anglicans don't even matter because we're Anabaptists. Again, we're continental, and so we're going to go out and we're going to make new interpretation is harsh, but we're going to reinterpret the Bible in a way where it hasn't been done. That's Anabaptist. That's also where you get, I can't remember if the Moravians, but certainly the Amish and the Mennonites are probably the two primary examples of the Anabaptists, especially the continental side. Whereas in England, you had your separatist Baptists. Now, these are guys that are descending from Catholic to Anglican to Presbyterian to Congregationalist to separatist Baptists. So Copper Star jumps in and he says the Methodist has split. Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the 20th century, and I'm trying to remember who is splitting in there between PCUSA and PCA. I believe split 50, 60, 70s. I might be a little bit off on that. So what goes on now, you have separatists, you have Anabaptists, and the Anabaptists are interesting because there was almost this washout from Amish and Mennonite to Quakerism to Methodism, this sort of general evangelical vibe, but not the Pentecostalism, even though the Pentecostals were separating from Baptists in different areas, and we're not getting into the Campbellites, the whole Church of Christ, not in the biblical sense, but in the denominational sense. And so the Baptists are pulling from all of this, and they're drawing certain lines with different conventions and saying, we're Baptist. And in comes this Reformed Baptist movement, which some folks are making the argument that this is historical Baptist beliefs. Well, what's going on is that this is really to make really wide paths and really wide brushstrokes. There is this separatist Baptist, which is again UK Baptist, and then there is this Anabaptist, general evangelical Baptistic practice, which is your general Baptist, and it's the bulk of the SBC. It's I'm trying to remember names here. I might get it wrong, but I think this is the whole Johnny Hunt position, and then you have guys like MacArthur, which are sort of straddling this line, and he's not SBC, but him and Piper are acting in this Baptist way. So all this is coming to a head in the 20th century, and Moeller comes in with the SBC, and he has the presidency of Southern, and he kind of sort of says that if you are a Baptist, a real Baptist is the separatist Baptist, is the let me jump through a couple of these real quick. Wit says, I always fancy a rhetorical question close to a friend. Paul said there's one baptism, so which one is it then? Do you think water or spirit? Give me a second on that. Okay. Pentecostals are wild, man, especially a single woman. Yeah. So it's an interesting group. I agree. Okay, not necessarily the point of the question. Wit, explain that one because I got lost there. Not necessarily the point of the question. Um, so go ahead, just explain that. I'd appreciate it. Okay, so Mueller comes in and he kind of, sort of hinting and not quite saying, like, no, to be Baptist, you are this reformed separatist. And then that, before we even get into Presbyterianism and can Baptists even be reformed, there is this great showdown between these two conservative branches within the SBC, and what does it mean to be conservative, and the some of the other colleges within universities, the seminaries within the SBC are being like, well, we don't like either of y'all. Like, we're the colleges, we can be as liberal as we want. And Mueller and some other guys, they do a good job of pulling the convention. I was about to say denomination, of pulling the convention back and saying, no, this is what it means to be Baptist in the conservative sense, in the practice side. But on the foundational side, they continue to fight that fight. Frankly, I because of doctrinal theological distinctives, I stepped away from being Baptist intentionally. 2017, 2018, 2019, maybe all in there, to the point that I'm saying, Presbyterianism, I kind of can get there, but once the believer's baptism fell, it was sort of all gas and no brakes, to the point that now I am a man without a home for everything I've just said. I will worship sometimes at a Baptist church. I will, yeah. I live in a particular part of the country where it is difficult to find anything other than a Baptist church or a Church of Christ, and I will worship at them sometimes, and I will thank God that I am able to do any sort of worship with any group of believers uh, that don't have any sort of major heresy going on, and I look forward to other denominations potentially being planted here in this area I'm in, and being able to participate in that. Let's see. I'll never be a blanket advocate for Pentecostalism, says Witt, as such. But all of this fastidious worrying about methods of water baptism is a bunch of bull. There's something much more important. So, I think I agree with the spirit of what you're saying. Where this really started flipping on its head for me was a sacramental. Oh, okay. Let's see. He follows up by saying, that's the operation of God's Spirit in our lives. Screw these silly distractions. So I think I more or less agree with this. I will say, people could tell me that I'm a fence sitter or whatever, because I've really stepped away from the mechanics of how these things operate, and I've been looking more. Are people are they trying to glorify God with their lives? Are they trusting that God is operating in their lives? Now, from a preferential side, I very much lean towards a sacramental understanding. That there's a lot of history there with the SBC and things that I was doing inside the SBC, and how I was involved in it, going to university, how I was preaching at an SBC church, things like that. And in the midst of that, it just starts. Copper Star, I'm going to get to you here in a second. In the midst of me preaching and participating in SBC in different ways, I just start becoming convinced that the sacramental ways are probably closer to what God wants us to participate in. And so at its base, this sacramental idea, as we are coming to participate in the gifts that God has given us, and we are asking for his sustainment, and we are asking for him to continue operating in our lives through the sacraments, versus how I understood it, not necessarily how they taught it or how it should be understood according to Baptist or even to some degree Presbyterian teachings, but to how it was often interacted with. Whereas with baptism, I'm coming before God and I'm bringing my baptism to him. I'm bringing my actions to him. The ordinances very much seem to be a display of how I was following God and what my actions were as they were directed towards him. Whereas my understanding of the sacramental ideas were that I was receiving from God. And I needed that. I needed to be able to receive it because I was so convinced of that what I was bringing to him didn't count for much. Not in a sinful way. Not well. But it very much was this world of God. I want to participate with you. I'm not bringing anything before you, but I want to participate with you. That for me was the basis of a shift towards more of a sacramental theology and less of an ordinal theology. Copper Star, you said, I believe faith has some grounding in blood. Germanics are Protestant coded. It's who we are. I like the Latins with Rome or the Eurasians with Orthodox. So it's a curious idea, and I think Asha Logos, if you guys are familiar with him, YouTube creator Asha Logos, I think his argument would be along the lines of the Germanics are Aryans, in that there's particular ways in which we interpret and we interact with Scripture that are different than the Slavs, than Greater Indo-European, than Sub-Saharan, and there is a truth in there that I agree with, but I can't quite tell you where the lines are. And it's interesting to think that this might be a Protestant distinctive. I haven't quite gotten beyond the idea that there is a single truth within Scripture and a particular way in which we're supposed to interact with God and his church. So that might be a me thing, and I might be off on that. But if I trust that there is a single way, and by saying, I mean use whatever word you want, whether it's single way, whether it is proper way, whether it is the way, I'm not beyond that idea, and that leads me to being open to Orthodoxy and Catholicism and these different areas. And so the longer story is that I have, oh man, within Christianity, barring just crazy niche sects, I think I've probably been in more of the Christian churches and participated in some manner with them than not, and dug into at least on a layman's level, at least on that uh, initial level, the Catholics, the Orthodox, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, the Reformed, the Congregational ish, the Anglicans, the Church of Christ, the Foursquare, and Light Pentecostal, and Baptist, and Southern Baptist, and um, yeah. So I've been through some of them, and that's not I'm not remotely an expert on any of them. Uh, let's see. I want to see what your follow up was here, Copper. I can show it. Oh, I didn't pop up. Okay. I just have this issue where I feel like right wing Zoomers running Catholic Church or Orthodox feels like millennials running it. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. So that's. Give me a moment. Let me mute this real quick. Okay. So this is a very interesting point. Um, I don't know what age you are. Don't worry about doxing yourself or anything right now. Um, I can tell you for so the Zoomers came about in this weird time. I believe the first Zoomers were born 97. Um, and so the last of the Zoomers were 11 and 12. 97, let's see, by the time you start, well, by the time you're 20, that's what, if my math is correct, that's 2017. Okay. There were fights that had gone on. There were fights that had gone on within the church in America prior to 2017 that had sort of been moving the pieces into a new era for the American church. And in particular, what I'm talking about is in the 80s with Mike Warnke and CCM, and this Ronald Reagan is there, and there's like this great pull into holiness as is perceived by actions. And there is this second wave of anti-Catholic thought to some degree, and what I mean by that is Catholicism was here to stay, but in the '80s you had sort of the fruits of Catholicism that the Protestants could point and laugh at. So you had Madonna, and you had The Godfather, and you had these cultural touchstones that had bits of truth in them that were saying Catholicism doesn't matter. Look at the fruits of what Catholicism produces. And so this is the 80s. You're still catching some wafts of that through the 90s, and the one of the reactions within evangelicalism is to have this greater Puritanism, and also, howdy Abbott, good to see you here. You have this greater Puritanism, this callback to holiness within evangelicalism, and then you also have this sort of Pentecostal flair, not a complete rush to Pentecostalism, but this sort of Pentecostal flair that's coming into these evangelical eras, or excuse me, communities. And so what happened is Baptist Presbyterians, they really started defining their their distinctives and their theological ideas, in contrast to some degree, in contrast to the Catholic Church. So they are just buckling down, and you are getting uh, the homeschooling movement is blowing up, and then you're getting purity culture, and you're getting a lot of these, to be crass and cruel, you're getting a lot of these Dadgummit, I lost when I said crassy cruel, and I forgot where I was headed with that. But you're getting these cultural expressions of holiness, and this is what evangelicalism is supposed to look like. And in the midst of this, if they weren't rooted in a particular tradition, this is when you start seeing the non-denominationals take off. And it's shocking to some people nowadays, especially, that some of the most hardcore works-based churches weren't the old school denominations within Protestantism, but were these non-denominational slice of Pentecostalism churches that were growing up, these community churches, these Bible churches. And so all of this is going on, and you've got the turn of the millennium, and in the midst of the the denominations trying to tighten down on their distinctives, they have a group that says, maybe we're doing it wrong. The fruits of which ultimately we see in the split between the United Methodists, split between different Presbyterian areas, Lutheran splits, bunch of Protestant splits, and um, other ones buckling down. Let's see, I'm getting lost here. I will get it. I'll get it. I had somewhere I was going. Then you've got Moody Bible Institute, and so all of these are in contrast to the Catholics. What happens is the millennials, they start coming of age in the early 2000s, and they are participating in this holiness by works, and they've got the purity culture, and they've got heavy CCM, the best CCM that has probably ever been produced. But slowly but surely, you are having teenagers that uh, or whatever, it's an adult stream, and it's 9, wait, 10, 11. Yeah. So we start at 9. You've got these teenagers, and they're fighting and dealing with sex and all of that, and so all of a sudden you're having this fornication that's appearing, and they've still got their purity rings on, but how is Christ impacting them? Or all of a sudden they're getting drunk because they never had alcohol in the house, their parents never had alcohol, because that was forbidden, not because it was forbidden in scripture, but because we are so righteous we can even reject the wine that God gave at the Eucharist, and we can start participating with Welch and the grape juice that he started producing during Prohibition. And we're growing up in this, and we're not seeing anything different in our life, and we're still dealing with porn, and we're still dealing with drugs, and in this whole house of cards that was built on the parents in the 80s and 90s going back to this sort of anti-Catholic Puritanism starts just falling in on itself in the mid 2000s. And I think that's why all of a sudden there was this run towards new atheism, because it's like, at least they believe in something that's real. At least what they believe in isn't fighting against everything I'm seeing in my life, because this whole Christianity thing didn't work. All these high ideas, like I believed in God so much that my girlfriend got pregnant, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, he was in sin, but there was this weird compression, almost like the Christian, the teenagers and all that were a spring, and there was just this compression and compression and compression of Christianity on top of them, of Protestantism, and then they were either an egg that cracked and leaked out and was broken, or they were a spring that just kicked off Christianity and pushed back against it. And that's sort of where you get into the running towards new atheism and religious trauma and the whole deconstructing nonsense and all of that. Um, so in the midst of that, I know I'm not keeping up with you guys over here. I will get there. Um, in the midst of that, there is this group of guys and gals that grew up in the church that believed there is something there. There's something worth holding on to. And they said, all right, well, I'm going to find God. And I'm not finding him necessarily in Protestantism. Some of them believe they did, and they started running even more to the lighter, softer edge non-denominational groups, um, or they started delving into the old ways. And one of the first ways, one of the easiest ways that they did that was with Reformed Baptists, was with the Westminster Confession, was with the Book of Concord. Now, the Lutherans are a little bit different. I'm not going to get into a pissing match over Lutheranism with probably anybody. And much respect to Tex if he's out there. Uh, but on these newer variants of Protestantism, they started saying where was it that we formed. And so this takes us back a half hour or whatever when I was talking about the difference between the Continental Anabaptists and then the English Separatists. And the English Separatists and the Reformed Baptists, they had these confessions that they could go back to. And so they start pulling the string. And what happened, what's his name? Like I said, I'm not really in Baptist circles anymore, but there was a fellow this past week who is making the argument that he's no longer Baptist, but he's Anglican. Excuse me, I can't remember his Irkey I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyways, so you will find this path in a lot of the millennials, and love him or hate him, or just think he's a joke. You can follow this path on Dyer. He's a perfect example of this in that he's growing up Baptist / general evangelical, and he starts pulling the string, and he winds up in a Reformed church. And then he's like, there's something to the sacraments. And then he goes to, I think, at least 2 different types of Catholic churches, maybe 3. And he's working through that, and slowly but surely he's saying that this search for truth, the search for God, because I believe in the midst of this, even with everything that's happened and this great winnowing and my friends deconstructing and purity culture falling apart and all of this, I believe that God is there somehow. And so he's pulling on this string, and he finds himself going from Reformed to Catholic to Orthodox. And I have known guys that, they go on the same journey, but they don't always end up at the same destination. For some guys, Reformed ideas was enough, and they're okay resting in the London Baptist or in the Westminster Confession. For other guys, they kept pulling on that, and they went to Anglicanism. For some guys, it's more Reformed. For some guys, it's more Catholic. And then some of them went into Catholicism. Some of them returned to Catholicism. And then some of them went to Orthodox. And so where I get tripped up in the conversation is that I think there was a genuine group of millennials that were dealing with their parents doing the best they could, or at the very least doing the best they knew how, and that religious experience growing up in that. I hate the idea of religious trauma, but it kind of, yeah, it kind of gets the idea across. So they're dealing with that, and they're trusting that there is more to God than the rules. And so then a lot of millennials find themselves, if they held on to God or if they returned to God, they're coming now to the old ways to a greater and lesser degree. Like I said, whether it's confessional or all the way to Catholicism, or even these days the what should we call it? What's good? I'm sure the French have a good word for this. but the current doggone it. I feel like it's there in the back of my head, but I can't get to it. Anyway, whatever the good French word is for the Orthodox experience in America, that's now something that these millennials have access to that they didn't used to have access to. So now jump forward 15 years with the Zoomers. And the Zoomers likely didn't have to go through the craziness that the millennials experienced within the church because their parents are probably either straight up atheist or a bit more chill on the Christian thing, non denominational ish, something like that. So now, what is it that is pushing Zoomers to the Catholic Church and to the Orthodox Church? And they're not interchangeable. I know there's distinctives between the two of them, but in this argument, I think they can be equivalent, and I think it goes back to sacramental, receiving from God, versus ordinal and presenting to God. I think that's a big portion of it, and then I think um, just trying to honor God with your life, I do think is probably a big part of what's going on with the Zoomers. The actual cultural things, boy, it's. I feel like the generation before is so close to the following generation that they probably miss a lot of, because human beings have so many experiences and pressures on top of them in those first 20-25 years that I do believe it's an entirely different experience, and the millennials are probably incredibly blind to some of those foundational experiences that the Zoomers went through. So why are Zoomers going to Catholic and Orthodox, and will there be a great falling away of those Zoomers? I don't know. It will be interesting to see the state of the church here in 20 years, but I'm here for it. I pray that the Lord holds me fast. I believe that He is. I believe that um, of that power that I do have, I am holding on to Him myself, and I'm excited. The Catholic, Orthodox, the older ways don't bother me at all. Um, but I think that's also easily explainable because of the whole millennial experience that I was just describing. All right, let's see. So Whitaker said, "I'll show my hand readily here. I've known brothers and sisters from many sects whose doctrine I don't agree with wholesale, but there's kind of supernatural, pre-rational knowing, which I'm convinced is communicated by means of God's Spirit. That is, one recognizes a brother or sister by a kind of instinctive insight, no matter their denominational allegiance. Call me an ecumenical dunce, I suppose, but such is my position." I think that's fair. I think that's so. Joel Salatin is this interesting back to the land, beyond organic, rotational grazing kind of guy. And he also, how does he phrase himself? A lunatic, libertarian, Christian farmer, I think. I might have it out of order. Anyways, he talks a lot about Christianity as well, and his argument is the idea, basically, that God has room for the Anglican and the Amish, um, all the way through the Pentecostal and the Presbyterian, and that in God's alphabet of churches, you kind of find His alphabet of grace, and it's not that ecumenical idea for me is not something by personality or by birth that I'm okay with. It's not something I like participating in. But the older I get, the more I think that's probably closer to the truth than anything else I've come up with or seen myself. That there is this. There are, I think, things that we can absolutely separate from, in regards to things that we're going to participate in regards to things that we are going to say are holy. But I think there's probably a broader group of things that we can act in agreement towards, um, especially in moving towards the glory of God and proclaiming His glory, than not. And certainly in the when it comes to heaven and hell, all bets are off for me anymore. I used to. I don't like the person who I used to be, and how I um, would say which Christians, which people that were proclaiming a faith in Christ, which of them were going to heaven and hell, um, to the point that I even don't. Uh, we can get into universalism one day. I mean, we can get into it tonight. I'm not a universalist. Um, not a universalist proper. I'm a universalist by hope, which is to say that I hope there is some experience of hell and some working of God that is both beyond my understanding and certainly beyond my knowledge, that will ultimately save all of creation. I don't see that expressed in the Bible, and it's not something I'm going to preach and say this is what's happening. But it's something that I think is it is a possibility. I don't think that's going against Scripture. Um, but yeah, I think I probably am becoming more ecumenical, even though that's not how I'm wired. Let's see. I also come from the Balkans of America, where Protestant and Catholicism and Mormons are wrestling for control. So that's an interesting aspect in that, east of the Mississippi, the Protestants and the Catholics certainly they went to war to some degree, and it. I mean, the easy example is the KKK, but then, um, Knights of Columbus and this question of who is and isn't a part of the body, and thankfully cooler heads have prevailed, or it could just be that the enemy, so to speak, that of unbelief and that of anti-Christian sentiment has become so great that the Christians, in particular to this, the Protestants and the Catholics have had to unite to a greater degree. I will say though, going back to the millennial ideas, I do think, I think there was a great awakening, not in the historical sense, but a great awakening in the, um, amidst the millennial cohort, that Christianity must be, is absolutely is more than our actions. And where we often found that available was not in Protestant circles, but was in Catholic circles or Orthodox circles. And so I think that potentially is where that softening started showing fruit between the high church and the low church. When we get into Mormonism, that's something that is, dude, I'm a kid from the Midwest. Like, that wasn't something I ran into until I joined the military. Now it was there, but I didn't notice it at all, until after I was out of the military. And so when you get to Utah and when you get to, it's tough, right? Like, I have, at this point in my life, I have met Mormons that I respect, and I I have met guys that, so just like you, I don't believe you should be saying who is and isn't going to hell. I think there's also the opposite side where you can't say who is and isn't going to heaven. And so I'm not going to say that any Mormon I've met is going to heaven, but I have certainly met Mormons that seem to love Christ, and seem to want to worship God. And so I don't agree. I'm not Mormon. I don't agree with Mormon thought, and yet I'm not going to say how much incorrect thought God is going to permit. Like I said, I don't like getting into mechanics anymore. All of which is to say, there are things that I would separate from Mormons on, but I'm also going to expect them to be closer to brotherhood than I am other religions, which frankly dismiss Christ outright. At least there is some form of chasing after Christ uh, within the Church of Latter-day Saints. So that's sort of where I'm at with Mormons, but I'm also very, very ignorant of them, mechanically and doctrinally. Let's see. This is awesome, guys. You're just filling up my chat. Let's see. Guys, we succeed in getting Panda to run his mouth in a very fluent and informative way. Oh, dear. Is that not... It's not normally me, I guess. Probably think about my words a lot. I try to be choosy with my words. For as many words as I say, I worry about them not being of value. Okay, let's see. Agree with Middleton here. Via God's Spirit, believers, first time we will be like him. Yeah, so theosis has meant a lot to me here in the past couple of years. The idea that I think it was Anselm, but the idea that God became man so man could become God. And, too often, I was actually talking with somebody this past week about it, too often we can hear that and we say, oh, we can't become God. And there's this instant Protestant near revulsion to it. And it's like, no, it's not become like God as in we are capable of smiting folks and creating ex nihilo. Not even, you know what I'm saying, but creating out of nothing. It's not that, but it is that becoming God as if, regardless of the situation, if it is within our power to be God unto that situation, to act as God would in that situation, that's what we will do. Let's see. I don't like the person I used to be. It's sobering to meditate upon. Yeah, this is so often there's this great tension in Christianity where in the already and the not yet, we're between sinners and saints, where we are supposed to act in a way that glorifies God, and we are trusting in his providence that our actions are not the sole effector in our life. And I don't like the idea of balance, but I'm very much a fan of the idea of the via media, the middle way, the straight and narrow. That there is this opportunity that sits in between Gnosticism and materialism that allows us to participate in the cross and allows us to participate in Christ. Let's see. Hardships and persecution will unite all true believers in Christ. Yeah, I certainly believe that. And what I think is interesting is that should should conflict and persecution break out, which certainly they can. I think I hold more of an Ed Dutton approach to this, in that I think actually we've probably apexed on the bad for now, and we're going to go into a cycle of more or less condensing between believers in Neo Byzantium. I don't think persecution is going to be the greatest um, external externality at this point. Excuse me. But that presents its own issues, right? Where there is a lack of evolutionary pressures, that in itself is an evolutionary pressure, and so those are the times where we leave God and we dance foolishly around the fire and we claim that there is no God. Um, I think culture is playing catch up right now to the vanguard. It's a word that's a little bit overused, but I think the writing is on the wall, and most people just haven't begun to read it yet. Let's see. Copper Star jumps in. He says, most people misunderstand to the degree that my ancestors have actually fought the Mormons using combat arms since we settled here in the 1870s. As in the Southwest, we've been in America since 1824. Don't at me. Well, I'm not sure if you're talking to me or if you're talking to somebody else. That's It's interesting. I would actually be super curious to get your perspective on that. Were you originally Texan? Were you originally Scotch Irish? Were you um, Germanic? I know you were laughing about Stone Choir earlier. Um, so, like I said, I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to Mormon history. I know there was, well, I don't know. Somebody school me, because I know there was some sort of massacre, and I believe that was Mormons against one of the tribal nations there in Utah. Might be wrong on that. And then I also don't know the Anglo slash Germanic fights that went on between Brigham Young and the rest of the Mormon groups. So Copper Star, you are welcome to school me on that. Um, yeah, so that's sort of some thoughts on Christianity. I don't know if anybody really had any other thoughts or questions on that. I don't know that I straight up answered any questions, but I was trying to, my dudes, and I do. I appreciate the engagement. You guys kept it lively during this portion. But all right, well, I'll give it just a few more minutes. Uh, let's see. Yeah, so Abbott, that's interesting. You had said some things before. Um, oh, sweet. Okay. So, okay. Abbott, Mormon, been here since 1700s, driven out of Missouri, stand proudly with fellow Christians. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe we can stream about that one time, because I would be curious, especially with you having the way you wrote that. I'm assuming your family is generationally Mormon, and I would be super curious to stream about that, hear about that, um, sort of see what the Mormon arguments are, or excuse me, not even necessarily arguments, but a little bit about the defenses and whatever to common Protestant issues, Catholic, Orthodox. Um, I would be curious what you would say about all that, and then, like I said, especially if you're generationally Mormon, I think that would be been an interesting conversation to have. So I'll hit you up about that one. Let's see. Copper Star. I was clarifying my message that we settled in Arizona in the 1870s. We came from Louisiana after the Civil War. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So then, what am I thinking? The Mormons, if I remember correctly, they would have already been out there then. Yeah. I can't remember exactly when Utah was founded. Or, well, actually, that might be more complicated because was Utah originally founded in such a way that the Mormons claimed it or that the Mormons were granted it by the federal government? I can't remember. All right. Abbott, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, the topics, the that dog one was something I've been looking to do here for a minute, and I couldn't quite find the right person. I think I think Sandbatch might have been interesting. Now, in fairness to him, I'm dropping his name, and I didn't even ask him. Uh, Frankly, I thought it was a little bit beneath him, but I don't think I'm entirely wrong. Maybe he would have been able to come on here and school me, uh, and that there was a British expression of this, and I'm being too lofty in my ideas of Americanism that I'm placing within those books. Um, so I don't know. That would have been curious, but like I said, I did not offer it to him, so I should quit uh, postulating. All right, Middleton, you did admirably. Well, I appreciate it, good sir. You are one of my strongest. Um, well, good. So I'll do a bit of shilling here, and then yeah, unless anybody has anything else, I'm going to take off. What's going on? We've got next week. I've got a stream coming out with a couple of guys. One of them is super secret, so I'm going to hold on to that. And then, oh, sorry, I'll get back to it. Copper Star just dropped in. Living in northern Arizona, we've always been at the front line fighting the Apache from the south and the Mormons in the north. All right, Copper Star, you are going to have to message me some good links on the history of this. On the history of this, uh, my understanding. Never mind. I'm actually not going to go where I was going to go. So anyway, go ahead. Send me some good links on that so I can jump into and see the history of what you're talking about. I'm super curious, especially if you've been in Arizona since 1870. I mean, that's pretty intense. That's pretty cool. We have a guy here out. We have a guy out here whose great grandfather, see, his grandfather, his great grandfather, he was a Dagum Texas Ranger. I enjoyed talking with him. There's actually, the farm is funny. We get a lot of interesting people out here, people that have experiences and come from parts of the world that I would have never expected. So it's a lot of fun. I don't love that. I don't love that a big part of my life has basically become working a retail counter again. Um, but it's fun to talk with people. Let's see. Wit said, I'm down with American exceptionalism. Makes me feel special. Yeah, it does. I don't think I'm too far off on that, on my ideas, but yeah, we'll go with that. Let's see. Abbott jumps in and he says, would be interested here as well. Fifth generation Arizonan settled near Holbrook. Oh, man. So, gentlemen, I I don't want to I don't want to put both of you on the spot, but feel free to message me if you think we could have a civil stream on Arizona itself. Otherwise, we will keep it separated. You will both be in separate rings, and never the twain will meet. Let's see. Wit, yes, Copper is on X. I will leave that for either you to track down or him to give to you because I don't know if he wants that blasted out here on YouTube. All right. There's a delay, but we're gonna try one more time on this shilling deal, and it is that next week I have a couple guys coming on, and we are going to be talking about the history of Sega, and that's going to be moving a little bit through their actual foundation, definitely into their systems, into the Genesis, into a little bit on the Saturn, because I'm not super exposed to the Saturn, but the Genesis, the 32X, the Sega CD, the Dreamcast, the pinnacle. My little bird hands right now. The pinnacle of video games, the Dreamcast. But we're going to do that. And then afterwards, Wit, in reference to Arizona, says he would love to hear an uncivilized discussion on that subject, actually. Um, so we'll see what we'll see if they would prefer to be combatives or just have their own time. I'm up for either. And then after that, if my timing is correct, no, it is not correct. Actually, there's a week in there, and I can't remember off the top of my head what I'm doing that week. But there should be a panel discussion coming up on September 11th with both millennials and Zoomers to work through what we experienced on 9/11 and then how that affected us and our livelihoods, vocations, and you know, just moving through the world in a post 9/11 world. And if we were even, frankly, when it comes to Zoomers, if we were even able to recognize that as such, a post 9/11 world. But all right, on that, hey, this has been a lovely stream. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope what I said was clear. Enjoy those dog books, and thanks for all the engagement, guys. And I will talk with you later. You have a good evening.